There was a specific life I had planned. Not vaguely, not in the way that young people tend to hold futures loosely and let them shift. I had constructed something detailed and particular, a life I could navigate in my mind room by room. By 28, the apartment in the same city where I had gone to graduate school, the work that would grow from the thesis I was finishing, the relationship with a man named Raphael that was, at the time, still intact and still pointing in the direction I believed it was pointing. By 32, the things that would have grown from those beginnings. By 35, a life recognizable as the one I had assembled in imagination and moved toward for years. By 28, the apartment did not materialize because the fellowship that would have funded it fell through in the third round. By 29, Raphael and I ended in a way that was nobody's fault in particular and everybody's fault in general. By 30, the work had taken a direction I had not chosen and that I did not especially want, but that was the direction available. By 32, I was somewhere else entirely, geographically, professionally, personally, and I was living, more or less competently, in a life that was adjacent to the one I had planned but not the same life. The adjacent life was not bad. That is perhaps the most important thing to say about it and also, paradoxically, the thing that made it hardest. If it had been bad, I would have had a reason to fight to change it, or to grieve it loudly, or to reorganize around the grief. But it was fine. It was actually, in many particular ways, good. I had work that was interesting enough. I had people I loved. I had moments of genuine satisfaction. None of this was a lie. I was not miserable in the way that announces itself as misery. I was miserable in the way that sits quietly beside a perfectly reasonable life and makes you feel, constantly and without clear cause, that you are in the wrong place. The wrong place was not the city I was living in, or the apartment, or even the work. The wrong place was relative to the other life. The one that hadn't arrived. For several years I didn't have a name for this. I had the feeling but not the vocabulary. I knew I kept thinking about the fellowship, about what the research might have become. I knew I sometimes caught myself calculating how old Raphael and I would be now, how long we would have been together, imagining conversations we would have had. I knew that certain ambient futures I had never consciously held, a child, maybe, though it had never been a firm plan, would sometimes arrive as images in moments of particular quiet, and I would feel something that was almost like missing rather than longing, as though those futures had existed and I had lost them rather than that they had simply never happened. My sister Natalie, who is more direct with me than most people dare to be, said once that I seemed to be in mourning for something she couldn't identify. She asked me about it the way she asks about things she has been watching for a while and finally decided to name. She said, "It's like there's someone you're grieving for. But I can't figure out who." I said I didn't know what she meant. That was partially true. I could feel the thing she was pointing at and I had not yet found a way to see it clearly. The framing that eventually helped, and it came from reading, not from a single conversation, though many conversations were part of it, was the concept of the unlived life. Not as a failure or a loss in the conventional sense. As a parallel track that ran alongside the actual life, carrying the weight of everything the actual life was not. Not better in any simple sense, the planned future would have had its own disappointments, its own wrong turns, but specific. Known. The unlived life was the one where I had become the person the other version of me would have been. What I was grieving was not a place or a person or even a set of circumstances. I was grieving a self. The self who had taken the other door and built a life inside a different room. The grief was real grief, not metaphorical, not self-indulgent, not something to be managed away with the observation that everyone's life involves unchosen directions. It was the grief that comes from understanding that you are definitively not going to be certain people you could have been. That the window has closed. That the age has passed at which certain things remain possible. That the person you had prepared yourself to become has been replaced, through no dramatic event but through ordinary accumulation of time, by someone you hadn't prepared for. The difficulty was that I was doing this grief inside a life that didn't look like a loss. The actual life did not provide the external validation that would have made the grief legible. Nobody saw me as someone who had lost something, because what I had lost was invisible. It had never existed anywhere outside of my own internal projection. I couldn't describe it without sounding like I was complaining about a life that was, by any reasonable external measure, fine. So I did the grief in the way you do invisible grief, privately, partially, and at the cost of full presence in the life I was actually in. I spent years slightly outside the life I was living, watching it as though from a position slightly above and to the left, with one eye on the version of it I was inhabiting and the other eye, the eye that would not close, trained on the life that wasn't there. The movement through it, I won't call it resolution, because grief doesn't resolve in a way that removes it, it resolves in a way that changes your relationship to it, required me to do the thing I had been refusing to do. To look at the planned life directly and say, that one is finished. Not postponed. Not available on a different timeline. Finished. This sounds simple enough to say. It was not simple to do. Because to close the door on the unlived life fully and consciously was to grieve not just what was lost but the self who had held that life in mind. That version of me, the one who had been oriented toward the other future, had to be acknowledged and then let go alongside the future itself. I had to say goodbye to both the life and the person I had been while I was hoping for it. What I found on the other side of that, and it took longer than I would have liked, was that the actual life became, incrementally and then with increasing speed, more fully available to me. Not better in the abstract, not relieved of its actual limitations, but present in a way it had not been while I was partially elsewhere. I could stop calculating what age the other version of me would be. I could stop imagining the conversations with Raphael. I could put down the specific, detailed, room-by-room interior of the life that hadn't arrived, and find that the life that had arrived had rooms I hadn't been in yet. I hadn't been in them because I'd been watching a different house. Here is what I carry forward from this, and what I hope might be useful if you recognize any part of your own story in mine. The pattern I described does not operate because we are careless or unintelligent or unaware. It operates because it has a function, because it is doing something for us that we have not found another way to do. Staying in the wrong situation, staying silent when we should speak, not walking away when the door is right there, all of these behaviors persist because they are solving something, even if imperfectly. They are providing some version of comfort or protection or identity that we have not yet found a better way to provide. Understanding that function is the first move. Not judging the behavior, but asking honestly, what is this doing for me? What would I have to give up if I stopped? What am I afraid will happen if I make the change I know I need to make? Those questions do not dissolve the pattern automatically, but they make it visible in a new way. And visibility changes the relationship to the thing. When you can see what something is doing, you can start to choose whether you want it to keep doing it. The change that followed was not easier because I understood the mechanism. It was the same difficulty. But I went into it knowing what I was moving through rather than being entirely inside it without perspective. That perspective is what I want to pass on here. Not the specific story. The structure. The shape of how we stay in things longer than we should, how we look away from things we can see, how we tell ourselves the thing will change without giving it a mechanism for changing. You are not alone in this. It is not a character flaw. It is how the human nervous system manages uncertainty and fear. But you can do something different. The doing starts with the looking. Look at it. Directly. Honestly. Without the story that makes it easier to carry. And then decide what you want to do with what you see. That decision, fully conscious and fully yours, is the only kind that actually changes anything. There is also something I want to say about the specific moment of turning toward rather than away, the moment when you actually do the thing you have been not doing. Because that moment has a texture that I was not prepared for, and that I think is worth naming so you know what to expect when you reach it. It does not feel like relief. Not at first. The moment of change, of finally having the conversation, or walking away, or saying the thing, or making the decision, often feels worse before it feels better. There is a period of acute discomfort in which the old equilibrium has been disturbed but the new one has not yet settled. You have stopped managing the avoidance, which means the thing you were avoiding is now fully present, no longer softened by distance. That period is real and it is temporary. I want to say both of those things with equal emphasis. It is real, do not be surprised by it, do not mistake it for evidence that you made the wrong choice. And it is temporary, it has a duration, and that duration is almost always shorter than the years of management that preceded it. The other side of that period is different. Not perfect, change does not produce perfection. But different in the specific way of someone who has stopped spending energy on maintaining something and can now spend that energy somewhere else. The ambient cost disappears. The weight that you had normalized as simply the weight of life turns out to have been specific and removable. I have felt that release more than once. Each time it is instructive about how much I had been carrying that I didn't know I was carrying. You probably know what you're carrying. You just haven't decided to put it down yet. When you decide, it will be hard first and better after. That is almost always the order of things. And the better, when it arrives, is real. What I notice now, in the life I have after the story I told here, is a kind of attentiveness I didn't have before. Not anxiety, that's different. Anxiety is looking for the thing that might go wrong. What I have is more like a quiet, ongoing check-in. Am I here because I want to be? Am I saying what I actually think? Am I moving toward what matters or managing around something I haven't named? These questions don't produce constant disruption. Most of the time the answer is, yes, I am where I want to be, saying what I think, moving in the right direction. The check-in confirms what I thought. And that confirmation is itself valuable. It builds a different relationship with my own choices. They feel more like choices and less like things happening to me. On the occasions when the answer is different, when the check-in reveals an avoidance or a suppression or a staying too long, I try to act on the information faster than I used to. Not immediately, not impulsively. But without the elaborate deferral structure. Without the "I'll address this when the conditions are better." The conditions will not be better. They will be different. Different is workable. Better is a fiction. I am the only condition that changes. And I change through the practice of looking and then acting on what I see. That's the whole thing. The looking and the acting. Over and over. For as long as it takes. Which is your whole life. But a whole life spent actually inside it is worth more than a whole life spent at the edge of it, managing the view. I know which one I want. I think you do too.